All right, yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Executive Show right here on the Executive Network on these digital YouTube streets. This is Corey Parson, the Fantasy Executive. Got a special treat for you today as we get closer to fantasy football season. My man from ESPN, Eric Moody, their fantasy analyst, is going to join us, discuss some running backs. Before we get to that, do not forget, you want to play fantasy football with the exec. Down in that description box, there is links for the Fantasy Football World Championship. I'll have a subscriber league coming up soon, but go down there. There is many games at many price points, and you know what? It's a good place to play and have a good fantasy football season. So without further ado, from ESPN, my man Eric Moody. Eric, what's going on, my man?
No, things are going great. We got a preseason football that's going on, training camp. Now we're near the conclusion of the preseason, so we know what that means. The NFL regular season is right around the corner. But I would say most importantly, Corey, we got fantasy football drafts going on right now.
No doubt. Definitely one of my favorite things to do. Now, I got a couple of things for you before we get started. Give everybody a quick story, your background, how you got in the fantasy sports industry, and how you made it all the way essentially to the top, you know what I'm saying, with the worldwide leader of sports and entertainment.
Yeah, no, I'll be happy to kind of do a Reader's Digest version. Well, it kind of all started for me with really having a passion for helping people, and I'll kind of tie this together because it's always like kind of giving advice, where I had it, and in fantasy, I started playing fantasy football. Had a buddy in a work league that invited me. And I ended up becoming addicted like everyone else and just really getting into it, getting into the research, the analysis. And that really led me to Twitter, for where I was like, let me go out on Twitter, kind of tweet out some stats, player opinions. And it kind of built momentum from there. But at this time, and this was back in 2015, I worked in the financial services industry. So I worked as a financial advisor. So I worked at JP Morgan Chase, Merrill Lynch.
Wow, okay.
I ended up at USAA. And it was like a call center role. So I would call, I would be in a call center. People would call in. I would give them financial advice. And had a lot of success doing that. And I ended up working as a manager there. But I always love sharing ideas and best practices to help people. So that's kind of the connective tissue between my previous career and then in fantasy. But I ended up getting on Twitter, started writing for different websites, Fantasy Football Locker Room. That led to an opportunity at Fantasy Pros, opportunity at RotoViz. Ended up at The Athletic, in fantasy data.
Shout out to Nando.
Yeah, with Nando. Yeah, Nando's my guy. And it's funny because I don't think it's a website out there that I haven't written for. I've
wow.
written for Dynasty League Football, 4 for 4. I'm like, you name it, Gridiron Experts. And so that ultimately led to an opportunity with ESPN, where I'm at now. And I'll cover the NFL, NBA, and WNBA from a fantasy and sports betting perspective. But I would just say the key thing, if you do have aspirations to work full-time in the industry, and I've written some threads on Twitter on different tips and advice that I can give, but just to kind of put a bow on that question, I would just say just always push yourself, to learn more, to be able to do more, and really just be consistent. Those are the main things for me. I would just say to bring all that together, I'm like, since 2015 up until the time where I joined ESPN in fall of 2021, I probably wrote at that point like over 600 fantasy football articles, appeared on dozens of podcasts, live streams, you name it. It's just to make it a priority and find a way that works for you to fit it into your day-to-day. So
that's cool. That's what's up. Where are you from? Where did you grow up at? So you're in Bristol now, but where did it get started?
Yeah, for me, I grew up in Alabama, in Mobile. Nice. Where they play the Senior Bowl. So
Senior Bowl location, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You got a kind of football, especially being from Alabama, you got to definitely, football is in your blood.
No, absolutely. So you got to choose a side, right? You got to choose Bama. You got to choose Auburn. So, and the reaction that you get depends on the person that you're speaking to and which side you choose. So it's definitely intense. But I grew up in Alabama, college in Louisiana, Nicholls State. Then at that point, I moved eventually to Dallas, and I'm still in Dallas now. I travel up to Bristol when I need to.
Nice,
but I'm based in Dallas, so that's kind of my path.
All right, cool. That's what's up. I'm a Cowboy fan. Mm-hmm. Next time I come down there for a game, I need to holler at you and our guy Ray G. You know what I'm saying? There in the Dallas area. Also, let's get ready to hop into it and talk about it. I just want to run through. Listen, I think running back is such an interesting position in fantasy football. Mm-hmm. I come from a fantasy landscape where running back was the backbone of fantasy success. And I think in the NFL we see now, right, with what people say the devaluation of the running back position. Has that devaluation of the running back position translated to fantasy also? If you was to take a consensus of first rounds this year, you would have Travis Kelce, a whole bunch of wide receivers, and 3 running backs. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
What is in PPR football, heavy passing league, do you still need to be solid, I like to say up the middle, in order to win in fantasy?
I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to prioritize running backs and still win. I would say one theme I've noticed, like Corey, like the summer, it feels like, wide receivers are going early and often. So a lot of managers may prioritize a wide receiver in round 1 or even a wide receiver in the rounds 1 and 2 because you've got a lot of great value at the running back position. I would say the sweet spot, are from rounds 3 through 7.
Okay.
Where you've got a number of solid kind of RB2 type of players who can easily exceed expectations and finish as an RB1. And so I think because of that, wide receivers are going early and often, and some of those running backs are falling. But then it also doesn't help that you've got the Jonathan Taylor holdout situation going on. You've got
Josh Jacobs,
and you've got these other players that have been vocal, and it's ultimately kind of driving down their value or average draft position. I would say is probably a better way to put it in fantasy right now.
Well, let's start right there. Where are you at? And people got drafts coming up this weekend. How would you attack the Jonathan Taylor situation, and how would you attack the Josh Jacobs situation? You're on the clock.
Yeah, I would say let's talk about those 2 players. And so we got some positive news on the Taylor front, right? The Colts have given Taylor like an ultimatum. You've got Tuesday to find a suitable trade partner. And so, based on reports, I'm like the Colts have received a ton of
offers, right?
Offers, yeah. I think from 6 teams. Where they've kind of reached out, being very inquisitive. But then you've got like 2 offers from teams. And I'm comfortable drafting Taylor like at his average draft position. I've seen him fall, anywhere from the late 2nd, 3rd round. He'll still be fantasy relevant because even if Taylor remains with the Colts, he'll play. Or if he finds himself a new team, he'll be in a favorable situation. Yeah. Like that's a guy that averaged, 20 touches, 108 total yards, and 18 fantasy points per game in his career. And I'd love to see someone like Taylor land like with the Dolphins or even like the Bears or the Eagles. And so, again, I'm comfortable drafting Taylor. As far as Josh Jacobs, let's talk about him. Even before Jacobs' holdout, I wasn't proactively targeting him in fantasy football drafts. Now, I know what some people are thinking, like, hey, he was impressive last season. Yeah, he was. Led the Raiders with 393 touches. He was solid from a fantasy points per game perspective, 19.3 fantasy points per game. Greatly outperformed his average draft position. But I just look at the circumstances, Corey, heading into this season. A lot has changed in Vegas. Like you've got, an injury-prone Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. You got Darren Waller. He just left the West Coast. Hey, I'm going to the East Coast. I'm going with Daniel Jones and the Giants. And then they've got an unimproved offensive line and one of the league's weakest defenses. So I see a scenario for where you got Jacobs. I mean, he may encounter a ton of stacked boxes. He's going to be exposed to like negative game flow scenarios, which I think ultimately limit his fantasy potential. So he's not a guy that I'm aggressively targeting in drafts, but if he does drop far enough, I'm open to it. But again, not someone I'm proactively trying to have on my teams.
Interesting. I think I got a couple teams already, auction teams, where I was able to buy that dip in that value on Jacobs. Yeah. And I think last year he put it together, and I agree. That offensive line is problematic. I'm a bigger Jimmy G guy than most people are, right? But what I will, and then he knows that offense. He was selected, chosen. He knows that offense, unlike the situation with Derek Carr. But I think he can be a decent volume play, Jacobs. You know what I'm saying? Particularly as his draft stock decreases. What about the Cook brothers? This is an interesting topic right here, because Dalvin with his situation and trying to find a team, and now he's on the Jets. But I didn't think that this offseason or this fantasy draft season we were going to see where James Cook is a hotter fantasy commodity than Dalvin Cook. But Eric, we're there.
Oh, we're here. Yeah, I'm like that. That's exactly what's going on. So let's talk about James Cook first, and I want to talk about Dalvin. So what I like about James Cook, and I'll be transparent. I'm in on James Cook. I'm surprised his average draft position isn't higher, but I like it where it's at right now.
Where you
I'm like
seeing him
this.
at?
Yeah, it varies.
I
I've
seen him in the
seen
5th this week.
that's kind of the spot. I've seen him go as high as the 4th, but it seems like
Wow.
rounds 5 and 6. And I'm thinking in terms. I'm thinking of 12-team leagues here.
Yeah, of course.
That is kind of the spot. And I'm like, it's a guy. You've got projected to lead the Bills' backfield. Had a productive and efficient rookie season despite limited touches. I believe he ended up finishing 3rd, like in yards per touch last year. Like he's a great receiving threat out of the backfield. He's tied to a Bills offense that has been productive. They got Josh Allen under center, and they've been a top 3 scoring offense like in 3 consecutive seasons. But it's some of the comments from general manager Brandon Beane, where he's kind of said, hey, we don't want Josh Allen to run quite as much because of the injury risk it poses. That could translate to more action for a guy like James Cook. And you've also have the general manager, also offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey, constantly using the phrase 3 down back potential. And he's a very good RB2 or flex option with upside, in my opinion. Even in the committee with Damian Harris, like both will be involved. But if you look at James Cook, he's been productive when given touches. Let's go to New York. Let's talk about Dalvin Cook. I'm like, you got Cook released from Minnesota, right? He's sitting there looking like it, looking at the Jets. Hey, they got Aaron Rodgers. That looks like an attractive situation. Aaron Rodgers is giving him a call. Like they've got a win now roster and a chance to win a Super Bowl. That's what's on the Jets' mind right now. And you've got Cook. I'm like, he's going to share the backfield with Breece Hall, a guy that's coming off of an ACL injury and surgery. Now, and I'll be candid here, I don't expect Cook to have like the same volume he had with the Vikings.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you look since 2019, Cook has had a whopping 1,075 rushing attempts. Like the only other player in the league with more over that time frame is Derrick Henry. But I think that 14 to 16 touches per game is a reasonable projection.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comfortable with Cook at his ADP, as my RB2 or flex, depending on how I'm building my teams. And this is a guy throughout his career, just like his brother last year with the Bills, has been productive on a fantasy points per touch basis. Like in Cook's career, I'm like, he's averaged 0.86 fantasy points per touch. So I'm perfectly fine with Dalvin Cook and James Cook, depending on where I draft them.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm definitely in with those two brothers as well. And I would give James a little bump up. I think he's a player that we're all excited to see this year. And the fantasy community comes together around one guy. Normally, it does hit, or at least it's been that way for the past couple years. I got another player like that I do want to ask you about. But first, let's go to the top of the board. How would you rank the 3 running backs that's, for the most part, the consensus first-round running backs with CMC, McCaffrey, Austin Ekeler, and Bijan Robinson?
Yeah. CMC, just based on his body of work, I'm like, you have to go with him first. And then where I'm torn is on like Austin Ekeler and Bijan. And I've got some things on Ekeler that I can talk about with my concern. I can dive into that whenever you're ready. But my gut's saying CMC, Bijan, and then Ekeler.
What's the concerns with Ekeler?
He's just not a guy that I'm aggressively targeting like at his ADP. Like I've seen him go like 4th overall, maybe 4 to 6. It may end up being.
He's in that middle, that 6 to 8. You know what I mean? He's in that. It seems like he's sliding a little bit as Bijan pushes up.
Yeah, he's just not. He's not a guy where I'm like, oh man, I'm on the clock. I gotta draft Austin Ekeler. So, if he's there, I'm like 5 or 6. I'm like, hey, why not? But I'm like, given his statistical body of work, I'm like, that opinion may surprise people. Like he's been one of the top players in fantasy. He's ranked 4th or better at running back in 3 of the last 4 seasons. He caught a ton of passes last year, 107, 5th most in the league. He ended up finishing 2nd amongst running backs, like in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. But I'm just really concerned about the number of touches that Ekeler will receive in 2023. Like he's got, solid running backs behind him in the backfield, with Isaiah Spiller and Joshua Kelly. But I'm just concerned about his number of targets and receptions.
Yeah.
Like you had Keenan Allen that was out last year. I'm like, you got Ekeler. He was active in the passing game during that time, like from weeks 2 through 10. Ekeler ended up averaging like 9.6 targets per game while Allen was out. You got Keenan Allen. He returns to the fold. That dropped to 5.8 targets per game from week 11 through 18. But I find myself, Corey, I'm like, if Eckler's there, I find myself saying, hey, I don't want to deal with the Austin Eckler situation. I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp
Yeah.
or, hey,
Ooh.
Saquon
Yeah.
Barkley. Or
Hmm.
I may even go with Travis Kelce in some scenarios. So that's kind of how I'm looking at Eckler right now.
And Cooper Kupp, as he slides towards the back of the draft this weekend, people, you're drafted and you're looking at Cooper Kupp in that 9-10 range. That right there, you can be a fantastic start.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and I understand the injury concerns, but Cooper Kupp, when he is on the field, last year in PPR before he got hurt, he was averaging 22 points a game. So, he can easily, he has an Antonio Brown type ceiling, Cooper Kupp. The running back situation in Pittsburgh is becoming increasingly more interesting as well.
Yes.
Najee Harris, the workhorse 3-down guy, the Roethlisberger year, Roethlisberger arm shot, check baby, 1-2. Last year, the foot, less catches, became more of a volume play. This year, I feel more comfortable than I did last year, but now the emergence of Jalen Warren and his skill set is also very attractive to fantasy managers.
Yeah, the thing of Najee Harris and Warren, I'm like, Najee Harris played much better like the latter part of last season when he was healthy. But to your point about Warren, it's like you've got the genie's like out of the bottle, right? I'm like, I
Yep.
remember in that preseason game, like that 62-yard touchdown against the Bills. Just a gentle reminder, hey, fantasy managers, do not overlook this guy. I'm like, this is someone who was an undrafted free agent in 2022. Really shined last year with Pittsburgh. I'm like, he averaged, I think it was 0.62 fantasy points per touch and nearly 1.5 yards per route run. So even in a backfield with Harris, I think there's some standalone value there. Warren is projected for around, I think it's around like 10 touches per game. And you just have like Najee Harris's kind of the awkward interaction and response when he was recently asked about Warren. And so I'm looking at that. I'm like, there's got to be something else here, something that we may not be privy to as being on the outside and looking in, just between these two running backs and how this committee will end up, I guess, materializing once the regular season hits here. But I just think he can be productive. Jalen Warren can be productive with Najee Harris, but just think about the potential, like if Najee Harris did miss significant time. So I think Warren's someone you should want to leave all of your fantasy drafts with, even if he's like your RB4 or RB5.
If you can't predict the draft, that's always a terrible thing to try to do. Even if it's your home league that you've been in for 20 years and you know everybody, predicting a draft is a good way to get in trouble, in my opinion.
Yeah.
With that being said, is zero RB a viable strategy this year?
I think it can be, but you don't want to force it. I've always been in the school of thought of using like positional tiers during your draft, for all the positions, because it's really going to allow you to really draft based on how others in your league are building their teams. And it really allows you to monitor the supply and demand of really every position. You obviously want to draft more players from the higher tiers. And that's what I love about using that strategy. And I would say it can work. It's the only issue that I have is that most people, when they execute it, they don't execute it like fully. Because I'm gonna get on my soapbox here for a little bit.
Go ahead.
Here is how you should do it. I'm like, you think the early rounds, and I'm considering the early rounds 1 through 5. You really want to prioritize wide receivers and or a tight end in those rounds. You don't want to deviate. I'm going to draft one in round 2 or 3 just because so and so was there. So you really want to target those type of wide receivers that are a lock for like 135, 140 or more targets. But then what you want to do in round 6 on is obviously you need to have like a starter or two that you can plug into your lineup while other things unfold. But you really want to target running backs that are part of a committee, like a clear-cut committee for where if one of those players ends up missing time or going down, or if the other one outperforms the perceived starter, like we're talking about Jalen Warren and Najee Harris, then you want to have those type of guys like on your roster. And I'm going to pull up something on Twitter because I ended up tweeting something about that this morning. Just guys kind of like off the top of my head until I pull the tweet up that you would want to draft. So like in round 6.
Yeah.
Like if someone like Alexander Madison is there.
Glad you brought him up.
that's a guy that I find that's in that range that may be available. You would want to pick him up. David Montgomery's another guy. But then you think about like Kenneth Gainwell. I'm like, he's in a crowded committee, but are you willing to have confidence in DeAndre Swift's durability or Rashad Penny's durability? So Gainwell's a guy. Roshan Johnson, Zach Charbonnet. I'm thinking of like Keontae Ingram. Remember, guys that are in a committee with someone that does have a robust injury history. Javonte Williams is another one. He's kind of depth. If he's available like in round 6 or 7, hey, go into the season with him as like your starter. Samaje Perine on the flip side. He's going to be involved. Sean Payton, head coach of the Broncos, loves committees. Rashad White's another guy. You think about Miles Sanders in Carolina. The opposite. You think of Chuba Hubbard there. I'm trying to think of some other guys like Antonio Gibson's one, Jerome Ford. So those are the guys that you want to proactively pick up, and then also continue to build out your wide receiver group, mainly identifying like breakout candidates. And so see what
would
what
you
I, what
put
I find
Khalil Herbert in that zero RB mix? Yeah, okay.
I would. So I know I went down a rabbit hole there, but most people when they think about the strategy, they just think, okay, well, I'm going to end up starting like Jerome Ford and like Zach Charbonnet. No, you're not. No, you are not going to do that. And so that's not the idea. You want to have like a viable starter, someone you can depend on, and again, just to wait while things like unfold, because everyone knows that the most popular position on the waiver wire, the position that uses up the most fab, is most likely the running back position.
No doubt
you just want to have those guys like on your bench for whenever they are those top waiver wire positions. They're like, oh man, John Doe's already got them on the roster. But anyway, I'm done.
No, that's it. And the opposite of that is though, right? Yeah. Okay, the reason why you would want to go robust RB is because when a running back hit the waiver wire, you can forget about it. You know what I'm saying?
Know, right?
Because all 12 are going after it if they're active. So, but like I said, there's many different ways to skin the fantasy cat. My good buddy, the King, Scott Engel, would always say. But Eric, my man, I appreciate this. You know what I'm saying? Thanks for your time in a busy draft month, coming up on a busy draft weekend. You know what I'm saying? So definitely appreciate you and what you're doing in the industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's always great to to connect with you. I know this is kind of the first show that we've done together. Hopefully the first of many. But I would just say, just everyone out there, just encourage everyone to follow me, at Eric N. Moody on all social media platforms. Like I mentioned earlier, I do NFL, NBA, and WNBA, all sorts of content from the fantasy and sports betting perspective. But I do want to direct everyone. I've got 2 articles that are published at ESPN Fantasy that could be helpful for you this weekend or even the weekend after if you have a draft. Now, the first one's going to tell you about players that I would take ahead of their ADP in fantasy drafts. The second one is going to tell you about players that you can pick up later in fantasy drafts. I'm kind of isolating like the double-digit rounds there. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, reach out on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it these days. Always like engaging with my following there. But hey, thanks again, Corey. Hey, it's been real.
No doubt. That is Eric Moody from ESPN Fantasy. For Mr. Moody is Corey Parson. We are out.